Perfect. So thank you so much. So the way we decided to do this was just kind of keep it less formal. Obviously, talk about the important subjects without it being on a whole presentation. But to kind of keep a sequence of order when speaking about estate planning, because it does have a lot of components to it. I'm going to explain it by document and then kind of trickle in how what Lynn does is so important, especially when it comes to life insurance, more so when it comes to passing away, right? So when we think about estate planning, the main documents that are composed in estate plan is the most common one that everyone knows, a last will and testament. Then there's the importance of also planning for incapacity. So that would be a protection mandate. And just kind of touching base on the difference between a power of attorney and a protection mandate. I think it's important when you're talking about estate planning to understand that in Quebec, there's a significant difference with a power of attorney and a mandate, and when one is used versus the other. So in terms of estate planning, there's a big misconception. A lot of people think I have to be rich, I need to have a lot of assets to think about estate planning. And this could not be more wrong. The moment you're an adult, the moment you're sane of mind, the moment you have something as simple as a bank account, you should be thinking about putting in place an estate plan. So many times I have the common scenario where the person that passed away simply had a bank account, did not think of estate planning because in their head it wasn't significant enough for them. And the problems that came with just settling the estate because of this one bank account, because there was no will, it is crazy in terms of notary fees, in terms of delays with the financial institutions. So when you don't have a will in Quebec, you're going to end up seeing a notary because you're going to have to decide who the legal heirs are, which means there's going to be documentation required from your estate, paying out of pocket from their money so that they can try to access your bank account. So to go back to what I was saying, when I continue talking about estate planning, I want you to keep in mind that it's not for just the wealthy. It is for the, Monsieur, Madame, tout le monde. Everyone that exists that has an asset should think of this for peace of mind and ultimately for their family, okay? So in terms of making a will, well, why do we make a will? You want to decide who inherits and in what proportion. We're lucky enough in Quebec to have the notion of, we say in French, liberté de tester. So it's the capacity to decide who you want to inherit without restrictions. Obviously, there's restrictions in the conditions you can put. For example, you can't say I leave to my husband, but he could never get remarried. That's an illegal restriction. But there are certain things you can decide to put into your will, and you have a certain control over it. We're very fortunate because a lot of civil countries, for example, France and Italy, don't allow this, right? Their citizens can make a will, but there's a lot of restrictions and the percentages of inheritance. So we should take advantage of this, being in Quebec, that we have the full control of deciding where our hard-earned money goes, right? And the whole purpose of this is to give peace of mind. And what Lynn has to offer in terms of life insurance allows the transition from your inheritance, from your estate, to be transferred to your heirs with peace of mind. That's ultimately the goal of estate planning, is you're leaving behind family members and loved ones, and you want to make this as smooth and easy as possible for them. Plus, you worked really hard to build a certain net worth, so why not protect it, right? So in Quebec, without getting into too much detail, there are 3 wills that exist and that are legally allowed. So there is the concept of a handwritten will. There also is the concept of a will form. So a lot of clients ask me, well, can't I just print out a form online, fill it out, and it's valid? Both of these wills are valid. They come with a lot of disadvantages, however. So the main disadvantage is these type of wills need to go through probate. So you're saving money at the beginning, right? It's not costing you anything to prepare, but it's going to cost your loved ones thousands of dollars to get the will validated. Whereas a notarized will, which is the third valid will that exists in Quebec, skips the probate process. So this is why we push a lot to have a notarized will, because you're paying a notarial fee up front, and that's it. Your state doesn't have to worry about going through probate, which again, we're very lucky not to have, because the rest of Canada has probate, Quebec does not. So why not take advantage of this? And in terms of costs and delays and stress, I mean, it's significant for your family members. And another huge disadvantage is you are writing a document without understanding the legal implications. Most people do not have a law background, do not understand the considerations that go into preparing a will. So doing it when it's by hand or doing it through a form can cause a lot of issues in the execution of your estate in the future. Okay, so yes, there are 3 types of wills, but the notarial will should be favored, especially in Quebec, because we skip probate. We don't have to do that. When is it the right time to do a will? We prepare in advance when we're healthy, when things are going well, when we're able to think about it with a clear state of mind. When you're given a diagnosis and you're on your a healthcare diagnosis, you have bigger priorities to focus on than thinking about doing a will, right? When you're being told that you have terminal cancer, for example, the last thing you want to be doing is stressing about going to see your notary to go prepare your documents. So let's try to do this when we're in advance, when we're with clear mind, a clear mindset to make the right decisions. But not only that, there's also the notion of being capable. So as a notary, we need to make sure the person before us is completely competent and capable of making these decisions. So if you're on medication that can alter your decision making, if your dog of a certain age, so let's say in your 80s and your 90s, and maybe diagnosed with some sort of dementia or Alzheimer's or the start of it, it becomes very touchy to start doing this. So we always want to plan, hence the word estate planning ahead. So it's a very, other than that, in terms of criteria, being 18 years old and being competent are the 2 conditions minimum to be able to draft a will here in Quebec. Now, in terms of what a will allow you to mention, the most important thing, like I mentioned initially, is you're going to decide who inherits, in what proportions, what happens if that person can't inherit or predeceases, right? So we're going to forecast different scenarios. You're going to name an executor. So a liquidator is the real term, but I'll use executor because it's the most commonly used term. That's the person that's going to be responsible to move your estate forward, do all the administrative paperwork, contact the banks, the insurance companies, all of that. Deal with the notary, for example. So you want to be able to choose someone that you know is going to be competent enough to do it. If you have minor children, this is a huge one. You want to name your legal guardian for your minor child. So contrary to many people's belief, the godparents, grandparents, the aunts, the uncles, just because they have a tight relationship with the family member, with the child, for example, both parents passed away, it does not automatically mean the child will go to them. There is a court authorization that needs to be obtained. And sometimes that could be done overnight. Sometimes that could take a few days or a few weeks. And in the interim, you risk your child being under the care of DPG. So again, the last thing we want as parents is to have our child be under the care of a stranger because we didn't plan ahead. So that's a super, super important. If anything else, if you have minor children, this is one of the main reasons I say think of getting a will done. And obviously you can discuss other situations, etc. Now, when I talk about a will, and I think at this point, maybe Lynn, you can chime in and I can go back and talking about mandates afterwards, is the whole purpose of this is you want to guarantee an easy transition. So when I'm having the discussion with my clients, for example, ultimately leaving a will, writing a will and saying, I want to leave this all to my children or my husband, for example, we want to make sure that it's given clear of debt, or we want to allow them the opportunity to inherit the property and be able to decide themselves whether they want to keep it, whether they want to sell it. Unfortunately, sometimes when it comes to passing away, there's debts that are left, there's expensive funeral arrangements that are left that weren't planned for. There are certain properties that leave capital gains or tax implications. And this is where it becomes interesting with combining life insurance, is to allow that transition to your family members and ensure that all those negative implications, those debts, those tax implications are taken care of. So I'll let you jump on in explaining life insurance and how it could be used jointly with a will to ensure a safe estate plan.
Of course. So life insurance is a key element to one's estate plan. And the question is, how much do you need? Do you actually need it? Just a show of hands here. Has anyone ever settled an estate for a loved one? Okay. If you've ever, or in the future, if you've ever settled an estate, there are two types of estates that you could settle. One that's planned ahead and one that's not planned ahead. And the reason why you're doing this is because your loved ones, when you pass away, they're going to go through the grieving and the mourning, which is already hard enough as it is. The last thing that you want is to leave them in a position to kind of scramble for money, can't find documents, don't know where anything is, have to communicate with the rest of the family members because everyone has to be in accordance. Nobody ever thinks they have assets. Nobody ever thinks they have money until someone passes away. And I think, Judy, when you and I first met, I had mentioned that I was involved with the settling of estate of a family member, kind of a distant family member who had passed away. So he passed away 2 years ago, and the estate still hasn't been settled because this person didn't plan their estate, and they have real estate, there's money, and none of the siblings want to communicate. So it's super, super important. So as a financial security advisor, one of my roles is to speak to clients about life insurance needs. So there are two main reasons why one should get life insurance. There are tons of other reasons, but the two main ones are, number one, to cover an income that's no longer there if someone were to pass away. So when I'm speaking with, let's say, a young couple for the first time, forget numbers, forget terminology. I'll ask them straight out, if you, sir, were to pass away tomorrow, I'd ask the other spouse, what would happen financially, and vice versa. And that's where there's a life insurance need. So the number one reason why one would need life insurance is to replace an income that's no longer there. Because if your partner passes away and you have children, or if you don't have children, whatever your expenses are, now all of a sudden everything's on your shoulders. So if you don't have children, some people think that they don't need life insurance. What if you own a house together? What if you own a home together? What if you have a chalet and maybe a condo in Florida? What if you have money in the bank? What if you have assets to sell? So, and what if you just want to take time off of work because your heart, your soul just passed away, and the thought of going back to work, you can't bear it? That's the purpose of life insurance, is to replace an income that's no longer there and to fulfill a need that's going to happen when someone passes away. So that's the number one reason why someone would need life insurance, and how much you need depends on case by case. The second reason, and Judy had mentioned this, is to cover future capital gains upon death. There's life insurance that's available. That's simple term insurance, so it's this amount for this term. There's also other types of life insurance that is life insurance combined with a cash value. Whatever the case is, I see this a lot with real estate investors. I have a lot of clients who are real estate investors. I love them to death, but when it comes to real estate investors, all they think about is real estate investing. They think their real estate is everything. It's their retirement plan. It's their generational wealth. It's everything, everything, everything. But if you own multiple properties, upon death, there is a tax bill that's going to get paid, that needs to be paid. And it's a huge tax bill. And again, everybody says, oh, it doesn't matter, we'll just sell the properties and make a profit. Well, what if I just bought these properties today and I pass away 2-3 years from now, where there wasn't enough time, for a huge profit to be made, where it doesn't hit really the tax bill. You don't know when you're going to pass away. So the second reason why one would consider life insurance is because there are potential future capital gains. If you own a business, any assets that have a tax consequence upon death because of disposition, you need to plan for that in your estate plan, and life insurance could be a tool to help you. Now, there are situations where life insurance isn't necessary, and there are other types of needs that may be there. But I just wanted to touch on life insurance and the reason why many of us need it, and the possibilities that are there, because really it's not for us, it's for the people we leave behind. And trust me, in my career, personally, I've been involved in 2 settling of estates where life insurance, there was a life insurance benefit. And personally, I've had to file 2 life insurance claims when someone passed away. Nobody ever says, whew, I didn't want this money. Everybody needs it and they appreciate it. Okay, so I'll pass it back to you, Judy, to talk about protection mandates. Another great topic because a lot of people don't have it.
Yes, exactly. So when I have the discussion or when I talk about estate planning, it encompasses a lot of different elements, and one being life insurance and how it could be used to facilitate the transmission of your estate to your loved ones, tax-free, headache-free, whatever the reason is. Like she mentioned, it's a case-by-case situation. But at the very base, you need your will, and you definitely should inquire on the needs of life insurance and whether or not it's something you need to tack onto it, because it's not enough just to have the will if there's other aspects, financial aspects to consider. So obviously I can get into so much more when it comes to wills, but this is very surface level, and I'll leave my contact information in the chat at the end. So if ever you want to reach out or kind of dig deeper on any situation, you let me know. I also have a social media account where I share a lot of information, so feel free to join and get that. Disclaimer. Next, in case you have other questions and we don't have time to tackle them, there's a way to reach out to me, no problem. So we've discussed the importance of a will, the differences in Quebec. Now what I want to move on to is explaining the second part of having an estate plan or a solid estate plan is not only considering what happens if we pass away, it's also considering what happens if we fall incapable. And I know there's a ton of insurance policies, not life insurance, but disability and all that other stuff, that critical illness that can come into place when it comes to incapacity. But in terms of preparing for that, in Quebec, it's a requirement. You should have a protection mandate, or the rest of Canada calls this a living will, or a mandate of incapacity, whatever you want to call it, whatever terms you've heard. Essentially, in the event that you are deemed incapable, whether it's dementia, Alzheimer's, most common situations, being in a coma, having a stroke, having any sort of illness that affects your cognitive decision making, in that situation, you want to have a document that was drafted that names who that caretaker will be. Not only for your healthcare decisions, that's one element of having a protection mandate, but more so in the administration of your affairs. So unless you've passed away, the will does not come into play. So if you're in that limbo period, you still have probably a house you own, bills to pay, a possible refinance that's due in a year from now that needs to allow you to sign. General day-to-day banking, signing your income taxes, calling the government on your behalf, managing your investments. Life goes on. And if you are incapable, you want to have named someone in advance that you trust, that's going to replace you in your roles and responsibilities, and is going to take care of you and put your best interest forward. Okay, So having a protection mandate allows you to name one or several people to manage your affairs and to make healthcare decisions. And when I talk about healthcare decisions, it's the common decisions like unplugging, putting you in a residence or in a certain palliative care. Ultimately, if there's an urgent situation, a doctor isn't going to ask for the protection mandate, right? But if it's a long-term decision, they definitely will ask. So there's those two components in a protection mandate to consider. Now, you're probably questioning in your head, well, okay, what happens if I don't have a protection mandate? What's my alternative? Your alternative is your family members are going to have to go before the judge. So the courthouses of the Superior Court of Quebec, and are going to have to do what's called opening of a protective supervision. So this court process is going to call upon a minimum of 5 of your family members to be present at a meeting where they have to all agree on who the caretaker will be. The court process itself, so I explained it in simple terms, but it's in fact extremely complicated, long and costly. And again, in and in itself, this could be its own presentation. This opening of a protective supervision offers many disadvantages for yourself, the person that's incapable, and for the family members. First and foremost, there's delays. So in Quebec right now, it could take up to a year before someone is named your legal representative. So think about it. 1 year of bank accounts being frozen, 1 year of nothing being signed, no one representing your interests, your bills not being paid, or your family members having to upfront from their own personal money to cover the payments of bills, for example. And obviously, the court costs to get this done are extremely high. So you're looking at anywhere between $7,000 to $10,000 in 2024 in court fees, where you can solve all of this with a very simple protection mandate done with a notary, which is a fraction of the cost. Now, I could give you my fees. You're looking at $525. So $10,000 versus $525, where you control who's named, for me is a no-brainer in terms of planning. And again, we want to do this document when we're healthy, when we're still capable. We're not going to wait till there's a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia. So if you have elderly parents that don't have this in place and they're still of mental and sound mind, they should definitely get this done before. And not only elderly, I'm just giving it a common example. A lot of times I get called, my mom was just diagnosed with dementia, we need a mandate of incapacity. It's too late sometimes to do that. So disadvantages, family members being called, court process being about a year minimum, court costs. But one of the main disadvantages is you're doing all of this for ultimately the person to be named to have what's called simple administration. So if you own a home, you need to go and get special court authorizations if you want to sell or refinance the home. What you just did to name the representative is not enough. Okay, simple administration means carrying on day-to-day tasks like paying the bills, minor access to bank accounts, but for the big stuff like managing huge investments, moving on, selling a home, refinancing, managing a business, all those things will require additional authorizations. And the government will supervise your administration as well. Versus when you have a mandate, you're giving full powers of administration, you're choosing who you trust, and you're limiting the family members, the government from supervising and having a say in what you're doing. Okay? So I hope it's clear when I explain the use of a will versus a mandate and the differences. I'll talk briefly about powers of attorney just to explain the differences between mandates, and then I'm pretty much done. I don't know then, Lynn, if you want to come and chime in a little bit maybe on protecting yourself with incapacity and different other insurance products that may exist. So in terms of a power of attorney and a protection mandate, there's a significant difference, which is the following. A power of attorney is only legally allowed to be used if the person that gave the power of attorney is still of sane mind, still mentally capable. So often we use a power of attorney if you're physically disabled, for example, someone that's maybe in a wheelchair that it's a lot of the effort for them to leave the home and have reduced mobility. They could perhaps give a power of attorney to a family member they trust to do their day-to-day activities. Or if you're a businessman or you're a snowbird, could be useful because back in the day, electronic signings weren't as predominant as they are now. And there's still limitations on electronic signing, so a power of attorney could become extremely useful. But if I were to call the person that gave the power of attorney and ask them questions, they're able to answer and understand what's happening. The moment that the person is incapable, power of attorney legally is null and void. You are not legally allowed to use a power of attorney for someone that has dementia or Alzheimer's. So a lot of people tend to think, oh, I have a power of attorney for my mom at the bank, or I have a power of attorney for my mom, so she has dementia, I could still use it. No, legally speaking, you're not allowed. It's revoked, and it's the protection mandate that takes over. Okay? So there's a fine line when one is used versus the other, and you have to be very careful when you're using documents to make sure they're being used legally. So I'm going to end it there so we don't go into a rabbit hole, and I'll let you take the floor.
Awesome. So one thing that I did want to mention is when it comes to life insurance, when is a good time to get it? And it's always the younger, the healthier you are, the less expensive it's going to be.
Yeah.
So I'm going to share a story which I've shared before, and some of you know that I'm married. My husband is older than me. He married later in life. So back in his 20s, when he was 25, he was in business and he had all the insurance he needed. He had life insurance, disability insurance, didn't have critical illness. And he was diagnosed with cancer. So he was 25 years old. Obviously, he survived. And then after he recovered, he went on this "you only live once" binge and canceled all of his insurance policies. And he lived on the rest of his life, because you only live once. Never thought he would get married. Never thought he'd settle down and have a family. Fast forward to when I met him, he was 47. And obviously we've settled down and got married. He knows I work in life insurance. He inquired about getting life insurance. He is, at the time, a man who is almost 50 years old, cancer survivor, diabetes, smoker, but he wanted to make sure there was, something for me in case something happened to him. He doesn't have any children of his own, but he wanted to make sure that I was protected. And I don't remember exactly how much it was, but for a low cost policy, like I'm talking 25,000, not a low cost, a low amount, a low death benefit of $25,000-$30,000 as a death benefit, it was upwards of $400 a month. Whereas if he had maintained the policies back in his 20s, which were, I would imagine, maybe $20, something like that a month, he would be covered. So when is a good time to get it? When you're young, when you're healthy. If you have children and they're obviously young, still healthy, get it for them as well. Because let's face it, when we get into the adult world, when we finish school and get our first career job, the first thing we're thinking about is not life insurance. So if you want to set up your children on the right foot, make sure that they have it as well. And if you have any friends who have children, minors who have suffered, unfortunately, a critical illness and are now uninsurable for the moment, they will be the first ones and the first ambassadors to say your children are healthy, get them life insurance. Nothing crazy, just a basic amount so that at least there is something if they decide to go on and never get life insurance for themselves.
Yes. And to piggyback on what you said, you never think it's going to happen to you. And similar to your story, when my husband at 30 years old got diagnosed with cancer, and thank God when we first bought our home when we were 25, he got a life insurance policy. And I was in that mindset because that's the only thing we have right now to hold on to. That if something happens to him, we can take that policy and convert it and hold on to it because it's the only option we have now. He's far from being out of it. And we know that even if he comes out of remission, it's going to be almost impossible to get insured, if not very expensive. And you never think it's going to happen to you. And it's, having lived through it, I'm the biggest advocate. Not only did I do this in my career, but I've lived situations very, very, very young that I can't, I continue to just speak about this because you never know. And as much as we don't want to think about these scenarios, they can happen. And same thing when you spoke about the children. I have a 4.5-year-old, and I unfortunately had to witness my friend, who's a notary, that had to stop working because her daughter at 3 years old was diagnosed with leukemia. And there goes her daughter's chances of insurability, despite the fact, like, she's living, she's healthy, she's doing well now, God bless. But again, we never think it's going to happen to us. And that's why the planning is so important when we're healthy, so that on those rainy days, we're taking care of our family. We're eliminating as much stress as possible so that they can focus on grieving or moving forward without the stresses that is left behind. Because you can plan all you want, but you need to plan properly. And you have to think of prioritizing what's important based on your values as well. And just, I don't know if you can see my response to Selena, because she did mention that she had done a will and not an incapacity. So very important to understand that a will and a mandate are two separate documents. If you have a will, doesn't mean the incapacity component is in it. It's a completely separate document. So if you only have a will, then definitely discussing with the notary to add on a protection mandate is a separate thing. They're not it's not combined.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on the protection mandate, a friend of ours just found out that his father, who's much older, he's in his 90s, he was complaining of stomach pain. So it turns out that he has stomach cancer that's spread. So this is why a protection mandate is so important, because he's still of sound mind. I mean, he's still laughing and making jokes, and he's very coherent. But all he has is his notarized will. And and there are 4 siblings involved, and all of a sudden all the siblings have an opinion on their father's health care. And he says, you know what, I've lived my life. What his wishes are is that I've lived my life, just if it's my time to go, it's my time to go. Naturally, the children want the opposite. They want to live for as long as possible. But this is where a protection mandate is so important, because you want to make sure that your wishes are respected. And you want to make sure your loved ones aren't bickering and fighting over making that decision for you.